My name is Vivian Hargrove, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of heartbreak this world could throw at a mother. I was wrong. Dead wrong. But let me start from the beginning, because the devil, as they say, is always in the details. The morning it all began, I was standing in my kitchen, silver hairpin back in the same practical bun I'd worn for 40 years of nursing shifts, watching the autumn sunlight filter through the lace curtains I'd sewn myself back in 1981. My hands, callous from decades of tending gardens and people alike, wrapped around my favorite ceramic mug, the one Marcus had made me in high school pottery class, lopsided and perfect in its imperfection. This house. Lord, this house has been my anchor through every storm life has thrown my way. The old Victorian on Elmwood Lane, with its wraparound porch that creaks in all the right places and oak floors that remember every footstep of our family's history. Theo and I bought it in 1975, scraping together every penny from my nursing shifts at General Hospital and his mechanic's wages from Murphy's garage downtown. We were young then, full of dreams and naive enough to think love could conquer anything. The realtor had warned us about the work it needed, foundation issues, outdated electrical, a roof that leaked like a broken promise. But Theo had taken one look at that wraparound porch and said, "Viv, this is where we'll grow old together. I can see it." He'd pointed to the gnarled willow tree in the backyard, its branches dancing in the spring breeze. "That's where I'll propose properly someday, with a real ring instead of this twist tie from a bread bag." He'd kept that promise 3 years later, dropping to one knee under that same willow tree with a modest diamond that caught the afternoon light like captured starfire. We'd refinished every inch of this place together, me holding the flashlight while he rewired outlets, him steadying the ladder while I painted trim that seemed to stretch to heaven itself. The rosebushes we planted that first spring still bloom riotously each year, as if they remember his gentle hands coaxing them to life. When Theo passed suddenly from a heart attack in '98, leaving me with a mountain of medical bills and our teenage son to raise alone, I'd poured my grief into these walls like cement. Every squeaky floorboard I'd fixed, every room I'd repainted, every corner where I'd whispered prayers and shed tears became part of my DNA. This house wasn't just shelter, it was my testament to survival, my proof that love could outlast even death. Marcus. My only child, now 45, with his father's broad shoulders and my own sharp green eyes that could see through any lie, or so I'd thought. He'd been my anchor after the loss, the boy who'd wrap his arms around my waist and promise, "We'll make it, Mom. You and me against the world." And we had made it, through his rebellious phase in high school when he'd come home smelling like cigarettes and defiance, through the painful divorce from his first wife Sarah that left him hollow-eyed and drifting, through the string of dead-end jobs that always seemed one bad break away from disaster. 6 months ago, Marcus and his second wife Lila had moved back home, citing temporary financial woes after her boutique went under during the pandemic. I hadn't hesitated for even a heartbeat. "Of course," I'd said, clearing out the guest room and making space in the hall closet. "Family sticks together." But the air in the house had thickened since then, like humidity before a thunderstorm that never quite breaks. Conversations would cut short when I entered a room, leaving behind the kind of silence that feels heavier than words. Late-night whispers drifted from behind their closed bedroom door, urgent and hushed in a way that made my nurse's instincts prick with unease. And Marcus's growing irritability, fueled by endless pots of strong black coffee that he'd brew at all hours like some kind of caffeinated ritual. It was that coffee that started everything. For weeks, I'd watched him pace the kitchen like a caged wolf, his phone glued to his ear during conversations that stretched well past midnight. Dark circles had taken up permanent residence under his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was looking, the kind of tremor that came from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. He needs rest, I thought that crisp October morning, watching him slump over his mug at the breakfast table like a marionette with cut strings. Lila was out running errands again, seemed like she was always running errands these days, her networking dinners and consulting meetings for some vague business venture that she never quite explained in detail. The house felt peaceful in her absence, filled only with the comfortable tick of the grandfather clock Theo had restored and the distant hum of traffic on Maple Street. I'd been tidying up the breakfast dishes when inspiration struck, or what I thought was inspiration at the time. In the pantry, tucked behind the flour and sugar, sat a red canister of Decaf coffee I'd bought months ago on a whim and never used. It looked identical to the regular stuff, same bold lettering, same promise of rich flavor. Just for tonight, I'd promised myself, swapping the grounds while Marcus showered upstairs, steam clouding the bathroom mirror where we'd measured his height through the years with pencil marks and dreams. Let him sleep like he used to, curled up with that old quilt Grandma Rose made. The irony wasn't lost on me, a former nurse resorting to maternal trickery instead of professional advice. But sometimes a mother's instincts trump medical training. Sometimes love makes us do foolish things with the best of intentions. That evening, as the sun dipped below the maple trees and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, I'd retreated to my sewing room on the second floor. It was my sanctuary, that little space overlooking the backyard where fireflies would dance come summer, but tonight it was just me, a half-finished quilt square for the church fundraiser, and the distant sounds of Marcus settling into his evening routine downstairs. I'd heard him brew his usual pot in the kitchen below, the rich aroma wafting up through the old house's generous floorboards. He'd settled in the living room afterward, the television murmuring some mindless game show while he sipped what he believed was his regular high-octane fuel. Lila had texted that she'd be home late, another important dinner for her mysterious consulting work that seemed to involve a lot of evening meetings for someone building a business from scratch. I'd smiled faintly, threading my needle with yellow cotton that reminded me of the daffodils Theo used to bring me every spring. Peace at last, I'd thought. Maybe tonight he'd actually get the rest his body was crying out for. Maybe tomorrow we could talk about whatever was keeping him up, address whatever fears were driving him to pace the floors like a man being chased by demons only he could see. But peace, I've learned, is a fragile thing. It can be shattered by the wrong word, the overheard conversation, the moment when maternal love collides with a truth too terrible to accept. And sometimes, the very act of caring, of switching coffee to help someone sleep, ends up keeping you awake for all the wrong reasons. If I'd known then what that small deception would reveal, would I have done it differently? Would I have let him keep drinking his regular coffee and living in ignorant bliss while he planned my betrayal? I honestly don't know. But I'm about to tell you what happened when a mother's love uncovered a son's greed, and how a simple switch of coffee grounds changed everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the price of trust. The evening started like any other in recent memory. I'd settled into my sewing room around 8:30, the familiar weight of the quilt square in my lap providing comfort as I worked by the warm glow of my reading lamp. Outside, the October wind whispered through the maple leaves, creating that rustling symphony that had lulled me to sleep countless nights since childhood. The house felt unusually calm. Marcus had been quieter than usual during dinner, picking at the pot roast I'd made the way he used to love, while Lila had excused herself early to take another one of her mysterious phone calls. I'd heard Marcus brewing his coffee downstairs around 9, the familiar sounds of our old percolator gurgling to life. The rich aroma drifted up through the floorboards, carrying with it the satisfaction of a small deception well executed. Surely by now, the decaf would be working its magic. Surely tonight he'd finally get the rest his body was crying out for instead of pacing the kitchen until the small hours like a man possessed. The television murmured from the living room below, some game show where contestants squealed over prizes they'd probably never really wanted. I could picture Marcus settling into Theo's old recliner, the brown leather chair that still held the faint impression of my husband's form after all these years. Maybe tonight he'd actually relax instead of springing up every 10 minutes to pace and check his phone like he was expecting news that could change everything. I was threading a particularly stubborn needle with forest green cotton when I heard it, not the television, but Marcus's voice, low and urgent in a way that made my maternal radar ping with alarm. At first, I thought he might be talking to Lila, but her car wasn't in the driveway. Then I realized he was on the phone, his voice carrying that conspiratorial tone people use when they're discussing something they don't want overheard. My sewing room shared a heating vent with the living room below, one of those quirks of old house construction that had allowed me to monitor Marcus's teenage phone conversations decades ago. I'd stopped eavesdropping when he became an adult, respecting his privacy the way any reasonable mother should. But something in his tone tonight made me set down my needlework and creep closer to that vent, my slippers silent on the hardwood floor. Yeah, I get it. Timing's everything, Marcus was saying, his voice clearer now that I was directly above him. There was an energy in his words that the decaf should have dulled, a sharp focus that made my stomach clench with unease. Look, the old lady's sharp as a tack, but she's got that arthritis flaring up, makes her forgetful sometimes. I've been handling more of the bills lately, you know? Power of attorney was a breeze last month. She signed it without a second thought during that doctor's visit. Said it was just in case. The needle slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a tiny metallic ping that sounded deafening in the suddenly suffocating silence of my sewing room. Power of attorney? I remembered signing something at Dr. Peterson's office during my routine checkup, but Marcus had explained it was just paperwork for emergencies, something responsible families did. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for escape. The house? Marcus continued, and I could hear the smile in his voice, a smile that chilled me to the bone. Prime real estate, man. Elmwood Lane's absolutely exploding. Those tech bros from downtown are snapping up everything with character, paying cash like it's monopoly money. We had it appraised last year at $850, but now? Easy $1.2 million, maybe more if we play our cards right. $1.2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. Our little house, the one Theo and I had scraped and saved to buy, was worth over $1 million? And Marcus was discussing it like it was already his to sell? We'll list it quiet, he continued, pacing now. I could hear his footsteps on the creaky floorboard by the window that I'd been meaning to fix for months. Say it's a family decision for Mom's own good. I've already scoped out a nice little place in the suburbs, Sunset Meadows, one of those assisted living communities. $1,200 a month, but it's got all the perks. Meals included, activities coordinator, nurses on call. She'll think we're doing her a favor. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling the gasp that threatened to escape. Assisted living? They wanted to put me in a home? The very thought made my chest tighten with panic. I wasn't ready for that, wasn't even close to needing that level of care. Sure, my arthritis bothered me on damp days, and I sometimes forgot where I'd put my reading glasses, but I was still driving, still cooking, still maintaining this house that had been my life's work. Lila's completely on board, Marcus said, and there was a conspiratorial chuckle in his voice that made my skin crawl. Kids due in 3 months, and we're going to need every penny we can scrape together. The debts are piling up faster than we can shovel, if you know what I mean. This place? It's our ticket out of this mess. A baby. Lila was pregnant. The joy that should have flooded my heart, my first grandchild, the continuation of our family line, was immediately poisoned by the context. They were having a baby, and instead of sharing this miraculous news with me, they were using it as justification to steal my home. We'll sell quick, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to an even more confidential whisper that I had to strain to hear. Split the proceeds after expenses. I'll take the lion's share for managing everything, naturally. She won't fight us on it, Mom's always been a pushover when it comes to family decisions. She trusts me completely. By the time she figures out what's really happening, we'll be settled in that beach house down in Myrtle Beach, toes in the sand, debts in the rearview mirror. Beach house. They'd already picked out where they wanted to live with my money. The casual cruelty of it, the calculated way he discussed my future like I was a problem to be solved rather than his mother who'd raised him alone after his father died, it was breathtaking in its heartlessness. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The quilt square I'd been working on slipped from my lap, the careful stitches I'd planned suddenly meaningless in the face of this betrayal. My own son, the boy I'd rocked through nightmares and nursed through fevers, was plotting to steal everything I'd worked for and warehouse me in some sterile facility where I'd slowly fade away from loneliness. Trust me, Marcus said, and I could hear him settling back into the recliner, the leather creaking under his weight. This is going to work out perfectly for everyone. Mom gets professional care in a safe environment, we get a fresh start, and the kid gets born into financial security instead of the mess we're in now. It's win-win-win. The conversation continued for another few minutes, but I'd heard enough. More than enough. Every word felt like a knife twist, each casual reference to my situation and their bright future carving away another piece of my heart. When Marcus finally hung up, I remained frozen on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan's lazy rotation while my world tilted completely off its axis. A baby. My grandchild. The thought should have filled me with anticipation and joy, should have had me planning nursery decorations and buying tiny clothes. Instead, all I could think about was how they'd hidden this from me, saved it like ammunition for some future manipulation. How long had they been planning this? How many late-night conversations had they had about my fate while I slept peacefully in the room above, trusting them completely? The tears came then, hot and bitter, rolling down my cheeks as I finally understood the scope of their deception. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision born of desperation. This was a calculated, long-term plan that had been months in the making. The power of attorney, the mysterious meetings, Lila's constant errands that kept her away from the house, it was all part of an elaborate scheme to strip me of everything I held dear. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for them. Marcus's moodiness, which I'd attributed to job stress. Lila's distance, which I'd chalked up to the natural adjustment period of moving back home. The hushed conversations that stopped when I entered a room, which I'd convinced myself were just private married couple discussions. How naive I'd been, how willfully blind to the signs that were probably obvious to anyone looking from the outside. The hardest part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was the casual way Marcus had referred to me as a pushover, someone who could be easily manipulated because she trusts me completely. The worst part was that he was right. I had trusted him completely. Even now, part of me wanted to believe this was all some terrible misunderstanding, that there was an innocent explanation for what I'd overheard. But there wasn't. There couldn't be. The details were too specific, the planning too thorough. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, this was a systematic dismantling of my life, orchestrated by the two people I'd welcomed into my home with open arms and an open heart. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in the darkness, replaying every word of that devastating phone call, analyzing each inflection for clues about how deep this deception ran. Power of attorney. Assisted living. Beach house. The words circled through my mind like vultures, picking at the carcass of my trust until nothing remained but raw, aching betrayal. Around 3 a.m, I heard Marcus finally come upstairs, his footsteps careful and quiet in the hallway. I wondered if he felt any guilt at all, or if he slept peacefully knowing that his careful plans were falling into place. Did he ever think about what this house meant to me? Did he remember the stories I'd told him about refinishing these floors with his father, about the rosebushes we'd planted together, about the memories embedded in every creaky board and hand-painted wall? Or had I simply become an obstacle to him, an aging impediment standing between him and financial freedom? The thought was almost too painful to bear, but I forced myself to face it. My son, the boy who'd once promised we'd face the world together, now saw me as nothing more than a problem to be efficiently solved. But as the first gray light of dawn crept through my bedroom windows, something else began to take root alongside the pain. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly, but the cold, calculating fury that comes from truly understanding how thoroughly you've been betrayed. I'd been a nurse for 40 years. I'd seen families torn apart by greed, watched as children who'd once professed love turned predatory when inheritance was involved. I'd sworn it would never happen to my family, that the bond Marcus and I shared was too strong to break. How wrong I'd been. But if my son thought he could outsmart a woman who'd survived widowhood, raised a child alone, and maintained this house through 4 decades of challenges, he was about to learn just how wrong he could be. The game was on, and he'd made one crucial mistake: he'd underestimated his mother. The decaf had failed to put him to sleep, but it had succeeded in keeping me awake for all the right reasons. Now I knew exactly what I was fighting for, and exactly what I was fighting against. And I intended to win. Dawn came like a reckoning, pale light creeping through my bedroom curtains and illuminating a truth I could no longer ignore. I'd managed perhaps 2 hours of fitful sleep, my mind churning through the implications of everything I'd overheard. But somewhere in those dark hours between midnight and morning, something fundamental had shifted inside me. The grieving, betrayed mother was still there, but she'd been joined by someone harder, more calculating, the woman who'd spent 40 years as a trauma nurse, who'd learned to assess situations quickly and act decisively when lives hung in the balance. This time, it was my life hanging in the balance. My home, my independence, my dignity, everything I'd worked for was under attack. And if there was one thing 4 decades of nursing had taught me, it was that victims who fought back had better survival rates than those who simply accepted their fate. I rose with the sun, my joints protesting the restless night, but my mind clearer than it had been in months. The first order of business was to establish a new routine, one that would give me the information I needed while maintaining the facade of the trusting, oblivious mother Marcus believed me to be. In the kitchen, I prepared 2 pots of coffee with methodical precision. Real coffee for myself, I'd need every ounce of clarity and focus for what lay ahead. Decaf for Marcus, insurance against any more slip-ups that might alert him to my newfound awareness. As I went through the familiar motions of measuring grounds and setting timers, I mentally catalogued everything I knew and everything I needed to find out. Marcus shuffled in around 7:30, hair disheveled and eyes still heavy with sleep despite his late-night scheming. Seeing him in the morning light, vulnerable and rumpled in his old college t-shirt, made my heart ache with the complexity of maternal love. This was still my boy, the child I'd rocked through nightmares and cheered through little league games. The fact that he'd grown into someone capable of such calculated betrayal felt like a failure on my part, a maternal blindness that had allowed greed to take root where love should have flourished. "Morning, Mom," he said, his smile that practiced boyish charm that had been getting him out of trouble since he was 5. "Sleep okay?" The audacity of the question almost made me laugh. Here he was, asking about my sleep while planning to ship me off to assisted living and sell my home out from under me. But I'd spent 40 years maintaining professional composure in life and death situations. This was just another kind of emergency, requiring the same steady nerves and careful observation. Like a baby, I lied smoothly, sliding his mug of decaf across the counter. "You look like you could use this. Big day ahead?" He shrugged, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Yeah, some meetings. That promotion I mentioned might actually come through." His eyes flickered away as he spoke, a tell I recognized from his teenage years when he tried to convince me his black eye came from walking into a door rather than the fight I knew he'd been in. Promotion. Another thread in the web of deception. I made a mental note to investigate that particular lie along with all the others. "Lila's got some appointments too," he continued, settling at the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years. "We might grab dinner out tonight, celebrate a little, if things go well." The casual way he delivered these fabrications, the comfortable ease with which he spun stories to cover his tracks, made me wonder how long he'd been lying to me. Had there been other deceptions over the years that I'd missed? Other times when that boyish smile had masked calculated manipulation? "Sounds wonderful, dear," I said, matching his tone perfectly. "Just don't work too hard. You've been burning the candle at both ends lately." After he left for his mysterious meetings, briefcase in hand and lies trailing behind him like exhaust fumes, I waited exactly 10 minutes before making my move. The study had once been a sunroom, a bright space where Theo and I used to share Sunday morning coffee and newspaper comics. Marcus had commandeered it when he moved back in, claiming he needed a quiet space to handle business. Now I understood what kind of business he'd really been conducting. The room felt different as I crossed the threshold uninvited, somehow smaller and more sinister than I remembered. Marcus's desk dominated the space, an expensive piece of furniture that seemed out of place given his supposed financial difficulties. Scattered across its surface were the usual detritus of daily life: crumpled receipts, empty coffee cups, a laptop half closed like a mouth caught mid-lie. I started with the papers, my hands trembling slightly as I invaded my son's privacy. In any other circumstances, this would have felt wrong, a violation of the trust between parent and adult child. But Marcus had forfeited any right to that trust when he'd started forging legal documents and planning my exile. The first discovery nearly knocked me backwards. Tucked under a stack of junk mail was a glossy brochure for Sunset Meadows Assisted Living Community. The cover featured smiling elderly people engaged in sanitized activities, watercolor classes, bingo games, group exercises that looked more like physical therapy than recreation. But it was the sticky note attached to the front that made my blood run cold. In Lila's distinctive looping handwriting, Phase 1, convince V, it's temporary. Emphasize safety, convenience, social opportunities. Avoid mentioning cost or permanency. Phase 1. As if my life was a military operation requiring strategic phases and tactical considerations. The clinical detachment of it, the way they'd reduced my future to bullet points and talking points, was almost more devastating than the betrayal itself. I flipped through the brochure with shaking hands, noting the circled amenities and marginal notes in Marcus's handwriting. Medication management, good selling point. 24-hour supervision, stress peace of mind. Memory care unit available, future planning. The callousness of it took my breath away. They'd already planned for my eventual decline, mapping out my deterioration like a business plan. The laptop required more delicate handling. Password protected, of course, but Marcus had never been particularly creative with security. I tried his birthday first, too obvious. Then mine, still nothing. On the third attempt, I hit success with Lila's birthday, a detail that stung more than it should have. Even his passwords reflected where his true loyalties lay. The email inbox was a treasure trove of incrimination. Dozens of messages from someone named Harlan Voss with subject lines that made my stomach churn: confidential, Hargrove property evaluation, market analysis, Elmwood Lane, timeline for listing preparation. I opened them with the detached professional interest I'd once reserved for reading medical charts, documenting symptoms that would lead to a diagnosis. Mr. Voss was apparently a real estate agent specializing in discreet family transitions. His emails were masterpieces of euphemistic language that barely concealed their true meaning. Helping families navigate the challenging transition to appropriate senior care while maximizing asset value was how he described stealing elderly people's homes and warehousing them in institutions. But it was the attachments that truly revealed the scope of the conspiracy. Detailed property valuations, market comparisons, even preliminary listing photos that Marcus must have taken during one of my garden club meetings. They'd been inside my home with cameras, documenting my life's work like evidence in a crime scene. Deeper in the email folders, I found correspondence that made my hands shake with rage. Messages between Marcus and Lila discussing strategy, timeline, and what they called V management. They referred to me by initial, as if using my actual name might make them remember I was a human being rather than an obstacle to their financial goals. V is getting suspicious about the POA, one message read. Need to accelerate timeline. Can we push for Christmas listing? Holiday market might work in our favor. Christmas. They wanted to sell my home during Christmas, uproot me from everything familiar during what was supposed to be a season of family togetherness. The symbolism was so cruel it felt intentional. But nothing prepared me for what I found in the folder marked personal, ultrasound images dated just 2 weeks ago, showing the tiny profile of my first grandchild. The baby I should have been celebrating, planning for, buying tiny clothes and toys for, had been reduced to a footnote in their financial planning. Due date impacts timeline, Marcus had noted in an email to the realtor. Need to coordinate sale with Lila's leave schedule. The medical records folder revealed even more damning information. Lila's boutique hadn't just failed, it had been systematically looted by her business partner before filing for bankruptcy. Marcus's recent job losses weren't due to economic downturns but to gambling debts that had made him unemployable in his field. Bank statements showed a cascade of financial disasters, maxed out credit cards, personal loans from predatory lenders, even money borrowed against Lila's car. They weren't just greedy, they were desperate. And desperate people, I knew from years of emergency room experience, were capable of almost anything. I spent the next hour systematically photographing everything with my phone, my nursing training coming in handy as I documented evidence with the same methodical precision I'd once used to chart patients' symptoms. Screenshots of emails, photos of documents, careful records of dates and amounts, building a case file that would stand up to legal scrutiny. The forged power of attorney documents were the final piece of the puzzle. Hidden in a manila folder, they showed how Marcus had taken the limited emergency authorization I'd signed and expanded it into blanket control over my finances. The alterations were subtle but unmistakable once you knew what to look for, additional clauses typed in a slightly different font, my signature carefully traced from the original document. By the time I'd finished my investigation, the full scope of their betrayal was clear. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a desperate response to immediate crisis. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign that had been months in the planning, complete with backup strategies and contingency plans. They'd studied me like a mark, identified my weaknesses, and crafted an approach designed to manipulate my maternal instincts and trusting nature. But they'd made one crucial mistake: they'd underestimated their target. I closed the laptop and carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, my years of hospital precision serving me well. Then I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of real coffee, and made the most important phone call of my life. Grant and Associates, how may I help you? This is Vivian Hargrove. I need to speak with Elias Grant, please. It's urgent. Elias had been Theo's law partner back in the day, before he'd specialized in elder law and Theo had focused on small business contracts. They'd remained friends after Theo's death, and Elias had handled our will and estate planning with the careful attention of someone who understood that legal documents weren't just papers, they were shields protecting the people you loved most. Vivian? My God, it's been 3 years? How are you holding up? His voice carried the warmth of genuine friendship, the comfort of someone who'd known me when Theo was alive and understood what this house meant to our family history. I'd been dreading this conversation, afraid that voicing my suspicions would make them real. But now, with evidence spread across my kitchen table like a medical examiner's report, I knew I needed professional help. Elias, I need to meet with you today if possible. I think, my voice caught, the words sticking in my throat like broken glass. I think my son is trying to steal my house. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Elias finally spoke, his voice had shifted into the careful, professional tone I remembered from the few legal consultations I'd witnessed. Vivian, that's a very serious accusation. Are you somewhere safe? Do you need immediate assistance? I'm safe for now. They don't know I know. But Elias, I have evidence. Documents, emails, recordings, everything. Can you meet me somewhere private? I don't want to discuss this over the phone. We arranged to meet at Murphy's Diner, a little place downtown that had been serving coffee and comfort food since the 1950s. It was public enough to be safe but quiet enough for confidential conversation, and far enough from Elmwood Lane that there was no chance of running into Marcus or Lila. 2 hours later, I sat across from Elias in a corner booth, my phone and a manila folder of printed evidence spread between us like battle plans. He'd aged well in the years since Theo's funeral, his hair more silver than brown now, but his eyes still sharp with the intelligence that had made him one of the most respected attorneys in the county. He listened without interruption as I walked him through everything I'd discovered, occasionally asking for clarification but mostly just absorbing the scope of the betrayal. When I finished, he sat back in the booth and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from the old days when he and Theo would tackle particularly challenging cases. Vivian, what you're describing is textbook elder financial abuse, he said finally, his voice heavy with professional concern. The forged power of attorney alone is a felony. Add in the real estate fraud they're planning, and we're talking about serious criminal charges. Elder financial abuse. The clinical term somehow made it feel more real and more devastating at the same time. I wasn't just a betrayed mother, I was a victim of a crime that had a name, a legal definition, a set of procedures designed to protect people like me. What are my options? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. What can we do to stop them? Elias leaned forward, his expression shifting from sympathetic friend to strategic advocate. We have several routes we can take. Criminal charges, civil litigation, emergency injunctions to freeze your assets. But before we decide on tactics, I need to know what you want to achieve. Is this about revenge or reclamation? Revenge or reclamation? The same choice that had been haunting me since I'd first overheard that devastating phone call. Part of me wanted to see Marcus face the consequences of his actions, wanted him to understand the pain he'd caused and the trust he'd shattered. But the larger part of me, the mother who still remembered the boy who'd drawn me crooked Mother's Day cards, wanted something different. Reclamation, I said finally. But with a twist. They think they're so clever, planning my future without consulting me. I want to show them what real planning looks like. I want to teach them that underestimating their mother was the biggest mistake they ever made. Elias smiled for the first time since I'd started my story, and in that smile I caught a glimpse of the sharp legal mind that had made him and Theo such effective partners. Now that, he said, sounds like a plan I can work with. The next week became a masterclass in strategic deception, with me playing the starring role in the most important performance of my life. Elias worked with remarkable speed, drafting new legal documents that would protect my assets while creating the illusion that Marcus's plans were proceeding smoothly. A revised will that left him nothing, a revoked power of attorney that rendered his forgeries meaningless, and most importantly, a trust that would place my house and all assets under ironclad protection, all executed with the quiet efficiency that had made him one of the county's most respected elder law attorneys. The beauty of this approach, Elias had explained during our second meeting, is that we're not just protecting you, we're giving them enough rope to hang themselves. Let them think they're succeeding right up until the moment we pull the rug out from under them. But legal documents were only half the battle. The real challenge lay in maintaining my facade as the trusting, slightly befuddled mother they believed me to be. 40 years of nursing had taught me the value of careful observation and strategic thinking, but this required acting skills I'd never needed in the emergency room. I had to convince my own son that I was exactly the kind of vulnerable elder he could manipulate, all while gathering evidence of his escalating deceptions. The first test came 3 days after my meeting with Elias. I'd been waiting for the right moment, and it presented itself when Lila left for another of her mysterious appointments and Marcus settled in for his afternoon coffee routine. With calculated clumsiness, I left the Sunset Meadows brochure on the kitchen counter, partially hidden under the morning mail but visible enough to catch his attention. The bait worked perfectly. I was washing dishes when I heard him discover it, his sharp intake of breath followed by the rustle of glossy pages. Through my peripheral vision, I watched him examine the brochure, his expression cycling through confusion, alarm, and finally, cautious hope. "Mom," he called, his voice carefully modulated to sound casual. "What's this brochure doing here?" I turned from the sink, drying my hands on the dish towel Theo's mother had embroidered with tiny roses, and feigned surprise. "Oh, that? Mrs. Henderson from down the street gave it to me at the grocery store yesterday. Her mother just moved into a place like that and loves it. She thought I might find it interesting." Marcus's face was a study in controlled excitement. "Really? What did she say about it?" "Well," I said, settling into my performance with the dedication of a method actor, "she said her mother feels so much safer now, with nurses right there if anything happens. And the activities sound wonderful, watercolor classes, book clubs, even organized shopping trips." I picked up the brochure and flipped through it with faint enthusiasm. Look at this lovely dining room. No more cooking every night, no more worrying about whether I'm eating properly. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but I delivered it with the wide-eyed interest of a woman genuinely considering her options. Marcus leaned closer, and I could practically see the dollar signs dancing in his eyes. It does look nice, he said carefully. Very modern, very safe. Have you given any thought to whether this might be something you'd want to explore? Hook, line, and sinker. I let a thoughtful expression cross my face, as if the idea was just occurring to me for the first time. I suppose it wouldn't hurt to look into it. This house is getting to be quite a lot for one person to manage. And with you and Lila here, you need your space to start your lives properly. The guilt that flickered across his features was so brief I almost missed it, quickly replaced by the smooth manipulation I was beginning to recognize as his default mode. We're not trying to push you out, Mom. We love having you here. But if you think you might be happier somewhere with more support. Oh, I know you're not pushing, I assured him, patting his hand with maternal affection that felt like a betrayal of everything that gesture had once meant. You're such good children, always thinking of my welfare. Maybe we could visit this place together? Just to look? The smile that spread across his face was triumphant, and for a moment I saw the calculating stranger he'd become rather than the son I'd raised. I think that's a wonderful idea. Let me call them and set up a tour. That evening, as I prepared dinner, Marcus's favorite pot roast that I'd been making since he was 10, I dropped another carefully crafted breadcrumb. Lila had returned from her appointment looking pale and tired, her hand unconsciously resting on her still flat belly in a gesture I recognized from my years on the maternity ward. You know, I said casually while mashing potatoes, I had the strangest dream last night. I dreamed there was a baby in this house again. Could practically hear the crying from the nursery upstairs. I laughed lightly, as if sharing an amusing oddity rather than fishing for information. Silly how our minds wander, isn't it? The look that passed between Marcus and Lila was electric with panic. Lila's face went white, and Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. A baby? Marcus managed, his voice slightly strangled. That's quite a dream. Oh, you know how it is at my age, I said with deliberate vagueness. Sometimes I think I hear things that aren't there. Must be all this talk about assisted living getting to me. Maybe it would be nice to be around other people, have some company. This house gets so quiet sometimes. Lila excused herself shortly after dinner, claiming a headache, but I caught her urgent whisper to Marcus in the hallway, she knows something. How could she know? She doesn't know anything, Marcus hissed back. It's just a coincidence. Old people have weird dreams about babies all the time. Their panic was delicious, but I maintained my innocent facade, humming softly as I finished cleaning the kitchen. Let them wonder. Let them worry about how much their supposedly oblivious mother might have figured out. The breakthrough came 2 days later with a phone call that changed everything. I was in my sewing room, actually working on a legitimate quilt square this time, when the house phone rang downstairs. Marcus answered with his usual professional tone, but something in his voice made me creep closer to the heating vent. Hargrove residence. Oh, hi Harlan. Yes, we've been expecting your call. Harlan Voss. The real estate agent. My hand stilled on my needlework as I strained to hear every word. What do you mean she called you directly? Marcus's voice was sharp with alarm. That's impossible. She doesn't even know who you are. There was a pause, and I could practically feel Marcus's panic radiating up through the floorboards. Yesterday? She called yesterday asking about a showing? His voice climbed higher with each word. Harlan, I specifically told you that all contact had to go through me. She's not supposed to know anything about this until we're ready to. Another pause, longer this time, during which I heard Marcus pacing with increasing agitation. No, don't apologize. Just, what exactly did she say? Did she seem confused? Forgetful? His voice carried the desperate hope of someone trying to convince himself that a major problem might still be manageable. She sounded completely lucid? The words came out like a strangled yelp. She asked about market comps and recent sales in the neighborhood? Jesus Christ, Harlan, that doesn't sound like someone with dementia. My heart hammered with savage satisfaction. I hadn't called any realtor, of course, but clearly someone had, probably one of Marcus's co-conspirators getting wires crossed about the timeline. The beautiful irony was that their own deception was unraveling their careful plans. Look, I need you to hold off on everything until I can figure out what's going on, Marcus continued, his voice tight with stress. Don't return any of her calls, don't schedule any appointments, don't do anything until you hear from me again. We may need to accelerate our timeline or find another approach entirely. When he hung up, I heard him immediately dial another number, presumably Lila's cell phone. We have a problem, he said without preamble when she answered. Mom's been calling realtors. Voss says she contacted him yesterday asking about showings and market analysis. She's on to us. I couldn't hear Lila's response, but Marcus's replies painted a clear picture of their escalating panic. I don't know how she found out. Maybe she overheard something, maybe she's been going through my papers. The point is, she knows more than she's letting on. A pause. No, we can't back down now. We're in too deep, and the bills won't wait. We just need to be smarter about this. Maybe we push the assisted living angle harder, make her think it's all her idea. Another pause, longer this time. The baby? We absolutely cannot tell her about the baby yet. Not until after we've secured the sale. Once she knows she's going to be a grandmother, she'll want us to stay here forever, turn this place into some multi-generational compound. We'll never get out. The casual cruelty of it, using my potential love for my grandchild as a weapon against me, was breathtaking in its calculation. They weren't just stealing my home, they were stealing my chance to be part of my grandchild's life, at least during those precious early months. Look, just come home early today, Marcus continued. We need to strategize, figure out how much she actually knows and how to counter it. And for God's sake, be more careful about what you say around her. She's sharper than we've been giving her credit for. That evening's dinner was a tense affair, both of them watching me with the wary attention of prey animals sensing a predator nearby. I played my part perfectly, chattering about my garden club meeting and Mrs. Patterson's hip replacement surgery with the oblivious enthusiasm they expected from me. But their stress was palpable. Marcus jumped every time his phone buzzed, and Lila barely touched her food, pushing it around her plate with the listless motions of someone whose appetite had been devoured by anxiety. You seem tired, dear, I said to Lila with maternal concern. Are you feeling all right? Just work stress, she replied quickly, not meeting my eyes. The consulting business is more demanding than I expected. Perhaps you should see a doctor, I suggested innocently. Sometimes stress can manifest in physical symptoms. Nausea, fatigue, changes in appetite. The color drained from her face so rapidly I thought she might faint. Marcus reached over and grabbed her hand, squeezing it in what was probably meant to be reassurance but looked more like a warning. She's fine, Mom. Just adjusting to the new business. These things take time. After they retreated to their room for another hushed strategy session, I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. Let them strategize. Let them panic about how much their supposedly befuddled mother might have discovered. Let them twist themselves into knots trying to figure out how to salvage their carefully laid plans. because while they were busy worrying about damage control, I was 3 steps ahead of them, with legal documents that would protect everything they were trying to steal and evidence that would expose every lie they'd told. They thought they were playing chess, but I'd been playing it longer, and I'd learned from a master. Theo had been the county chess champion 3 years running before arthritis made it too painful to hold the pieces. The game was far from over, but for the first time since that devastating night when I'd overheard their betrayal, I felt like I might actually win. And when the time came to reveal my hand, when the moment arrived to show them exactly how thoroughly they'd underestimated their mother, it would be even sweeter because they'd helped orchestrate their own downfall. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new performances, new opportunities to gather evidence and tighten the noose around their deception. But tonight, I went to sleep with the satisfied exhaustion of a hunter who knows her prey is already caught, they just don't realize it yet. 3 weeks into my carefully orchestrated performance, just as I was beginning to feel confident about the evidence I'd gathered and the legal protections Elias had put in place, the universe decided to remind me that I'd been thinking too small. The revelation came through what should have been a routine follow-up to Elias's suggestion that we explore every angle of my property's value before Marcus could complete his theft. You know, Viv, Elias had said during our last meeting, Theo once mentioned something about a geological survey back in the day. Something about mineral deposits? It might be worth looking into, especially if we're talking about a property worth over $1 million. Sometimes these old properties have surprises buried beneath them. I'd dismissed it initially as one of Theo's many hobbyist enthusiasms. My late husband had been fascinated by rocks and geology the way some men are obsessed with baseball statistics, always picking up interesting stones during our walks and speculating about the Earth's hidden treasures. I'd indulged his passion the way wives do, listening to his excited explanations about sedimentary layers and mineral formations while privately thinking it was all harmless fantasy. But Elias's suggestion nagged at me. If there was even a remote possibility that the property held additional value beyond its real estate worth, I needed to know about it before Marcus could exploit that information too. So I'd called Dr. Nora Klein, a geologist recommended by my old colleague Janet, who'd used her services to test soil quality for her organic garden project. I just want to understand what's beneath my garden, I'd explained to Dr. Klein during our phone conversation. I'm thinking about some landscaping projects, maybe putting in raised beds, and I want to make sure I'm not disturbing anything important. The lie came easier now, after weeks of practice deception. Dr. Klein was a compact woman in her 50s with the kind of practical efficiency I recognized from my nursing days. She arrived on a Tuesday morning disguised as gardening help, her specialized equipment hidden in what looked like ordinary landscaping tools. Marcus was at work, Lila at another mysterious appointment, and I had the house to myself for what I assumed would be a routine consultation. Beautiful property, Dr. Klein commented as we walked through the backyard, past the rosebushes Theo and I had planted and the vegetable garden I'd maintained for 4 decades. These old lots often have interesting geological features. The Elmwood Lane area sits on some unique substrata. She began her work methodically, taking soil samples and running tests with equipment that looked far more sophisticated than anything needed for simple gardening advice. I watched from the kitchen window, maintaining the pretense of normal household activities while my curiosity grew with each passing hour. Around noon, Dr. Klein knocked on the back door with an expression I couldn't quite read, excitement mixed with something that looked almost like alarm. "Mrs. Hargrove, could we speak privately? I've found something rather significant." We settled at the kitchen table where I'd shared thousands of meals with my family, where Marcus had done homework as a child and where Theo and I had planned our dreams for the future. Dr. Klein spread out charts and test results with the careful precision of someone delivering life-changing news. "Your instincts about landscaping were wise," she began carefully. "There are indeed things beneath your garden that shouldn't be disturbed. Mrs. Hargrove, your property sits on substantial deposits of rare earth minerals, specifically neodymium and dysprosium." The names meant nothing to me, but the way she said them suggested they should. "Is that significant?" "Extremely significant. These minerals are critical components in electric car batteries, wind turbines, and advanced electronics. With the current push toward green technology, the demand has skyrocketed. She paused, studying my face carefully. Mrs. Hargrove, we're not talking about thousands of dollars here. A conservative estimate of what's beneath your property would be in the tens of millions. The room seemed to tilt around me. Tens of millions. Not the 1.2 million Marcus thought he was stealing, but enough money to change not just my life but the lives of generations to come. Enough money to fund scholarships, support charities, leave a legacy that would outlast any Victorian house, no matter how lovingly maintained. But here's what puzzles me, Dr. Klein continued, her voice taking on a more investigative tone. These deposits didn't just appear overnight. The geological formations that created them have been here for thousands of years. And mineral surveys of this area aren't uncommon. The city has commissioned several over the past decade. Something cold began creeping up my spine. Commissioned by whom? The county planning office, primarily. Public records show a comprehensive geological survey of the Elmwood Lane area was completed in 2010, part of a development assessment that never moved forward. The data would be available to anyone working in municipal planning or surveying. Marcus had been working for the county surveyor's office in 2010, one of those dead-end jobs I'd assumed was just another stepping stone in his struggling career. The pieces began clicking together with the mechanical precision of a lock being opened by the right key. Dr. Klein, would someone working in the county surveyor's office have had access to those geological reports? Absolutely. That kind of information would have been part of their standard database. She studied my face with growing concern. Mrs. Hargrove, is there something specific you're worried about? I excused myself, my legs unsteady as I walked to Marcus's study and retrieved the laptop that had already yielded so many damning secrets. My hands shook as I searched through his email history, looking for any mention of geological surveys or mineral rights. What I found made my blood run cold. Buried in an archived folder from 2011 was an email exchange with someone named Derek Molina, apparently a former colleague from the county office. The subject line read, Elmwood Lane Survey, Confidential Query. Derek, Marcus had written, remember that rare earth deposit we flagged on Elmwood Lane last year? The one on my mom's property? I'm thinking about approach strategies for future reference. What's the protocol for private extraction rights? Derek's response was equally damning. Man, your mom's sitting on a fortune and doesn't even know it. Those neodymium deposits alone could set you up for life. Smart move not mentioning it to her right away. Timing will be everything if you want to maximize the opportunity. The conversation continued for several emails, discussing market trends, extraction costs, and family management strategies. They'd even researched which mining companies would pay the highest premiums for exclusive access to rare earth deposits on private property. Marcus had known. For over a decade, he'd known that my property contained millions of dollars worth of minerals, and he'd never said a word. All those years when I'd struggled with medical bills and house repairs, when I'd pinched pennies and made do with second-hand furniture, my son had been sitting on information that could have transformed my life. But the betrayal ran deeper than mere greed. As I continued reading, the full scope of his deception became clear. His marriage to Lila wasn't the romantic second chance I'd believed it to be, it was a strategic partnership. Her real estate background, her connections in property development, even her failed boutique were all part of a larger plan to position themselves as the perfect team to manage my affairs when the time came. The move back into my house 6 months ago wasn't born of financial desperation, it was the execution phase of a plan that had been over a decade in the making. The power of attorney, the assisted living research, even the pregnancy timing, everything had been calculated to maximize their control over my assets while minimizing my ability to resist. I sat in that study, surrounded by the evidence of my son's systematic betrayal, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't the impulsive desperation of a man facing financial ruin. This was the methodical theft planned by someone who'd viewed his own mother as a resource to be harvested when the timing was optimal. The boy who'd drawn me crooked Mother's Day cards with crayon declarations of love had grown into a man capable of hiding life-changing information for over a decade while watching me struggle financially. The son who'd promised we'd face the world together had been quietly planning to exile me to assisted living while he lived in luxury funded by minerals I didn't even know existed beneath my garden. Dr. Klein was still waiting in the kitchen when I returned, her equipment packed but her concern evident. "Mrs. Hargrove, you look pale. Is everything all right?" "Dr. Klein, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My voice sounded strange even to myself, hollow and distant. If someone had known about these mineral deposits for years but kept that information secret from the property owner, what would that mean legally? Her expression grew grave. "That would be fraud, Mrs. Hargrove. If someone used undisclosed knowledge of mineral rights to manipulate property transactions or inheritance planning, it would constitute a serious criminal offense." "Why do you ask?" I couldn't answer immediately. The weight of everything I'd discovered pressed down on me like physical force, not just the betrayal itself, but the stunning scope of its calculation. This wasn't a son making poor choices under pressure. This was a predator who'd been patiently stalking his own mother for over a decade, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Mrs. Hargrove?" Dr. Klein's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Do you need me to call someone? You don't look well." "No," I managed, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm fine. But Dr. Klein, I may need you to testify about these findings. Would you be willing to do that if it became necessary?" "Of course. But Mrs. Hargrove, if someone has been defrauding you regarding mineral rights, you need legal counsel immediately. This isn't just about property value, this could be about millions of dollars in stolen potential income." After she left, I called Elias with hands that trembled so badly I had to dial twice. When I told him what Dr. Klein had discovered and what I'd found in Marcus's emails, the silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Jesus Christ, Vivian," he finally said, his usually controlled voice tight with shock. "This changes everything. We're not just talking about elder abuse anymore, we're talking about massive fraud, conspiracy, potentially racketeering charges. Your son didn't just try to steal your house. He's been planning to steal tens of millions of dollars from you for over a decade." The magnitude of it was almost impossible to process. All those years when Marcus had seemed lost, drifting from job to job, struggling to find his place in the world, he'd actually been playing a long game with stakes beyond anything I could have imagined. His failures hadn't been failures at all, but careful positioning for the ultimate score. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to Marcus and Lila's muffled conversation through the walls, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete emotional numbness. The mother who'd ached with love and betrayal just weeks ago had been replaced by someone harder, colder, more calculating than my son could possibly imagine. He thought he'd been playing chess while I played checkers. But he'd made one crucial mistake: he'd underestimated the depth of a mother's love and the fury it could become when that love was weaponized against the very child who'd inspired it. The game was about to change in ways Marcus couldn't possibly anticipate. And when it did, he'd discover that the oblivious old woman he'd been manipulating was actually the most dangerous opponent he'd ever faced. Sunday arrived with the kind of relentless rain that turns autumn afternoons into something from a Gothic novel. The weather seemed fitting for what I knew would be the most important conversation of my life. Water lashed against the windows of my Victorian house, and the wind howled through the maple trees like something wounded and angry. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tensions and carefully maintained lies. I'd been planning this moment for days, waiting for the perfect opportunity when Marcus and I could speak privately. Lila had mentioned during breakfast that she had a consultation that afternoon, another in her endless series of mysterious appointments that I now understood were probably prenatal visits she couldn't risk me discovering. Marcus was in the living room, laptop open on his knees, surrounded by the comfortable domestic scene that masked his treachery. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was probably working on the final details of selling my house while sitting in Theo's old recliner, drinking coffee from the mug I'd bought him for his 30th birthday. I'd spent the morning in careful preparation, arranging the evidence like a prosecutor preparing for the most important case of her career. Dr. Klein's geological report, printed and bound with clinical precision. Screenshots of Marcus's emails about the mineral deposits, dating back over a decade. The ultrasound images I'd found hidden in his laptop. And most damning of all, copies of the forged power of attorney documents that had started this entire nightmare. When Lila left for her appointment, her goodbye kiss to Marcus lingering with the tenderness of conspirators who believed their plans were proceeding perfectly, I knew it was time. I gathered my evidence, poured myself a cup of real coffee for courage, and walked into the living room where my son was destroying my life one keystroke at a time. "Marcus," I said, my voice calm and steady despite the hurricane of emotions raging inside me. "We need to talk." He looked up from his laptop with that practiced smile that had once melted my heart and now made my stomach turn. "Sure, Mom. What's on your mind?" Instead of answering, I set the geological report on the coffee table between us, followed by the ultrasound printout. The transformation in his expression was immediate and devastating, color draining from his face like water from a broken dam, his eyes widening with a shock so profound it bordered on panic. "How?" The word escaped him as barely a whisper, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. "The coffee," I said simply, settling into the chair across from him with the measured calm of someone who'd spent weeks preparing for this moment. "Decaf. You talked in your sleep, too. Or close enough." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain beating against the windows and the tick of the grandfather clock that had measured our family's time for 4 decades. Marcus stared at the evidence spread before him like a man watching his own execution, his hands trembling as the full scope of his exposure became clear. "Mom, I can explain," he began, his voice cracking with the desperation of someone who knew there was no explanation that could possibly suffice. "It's not what you think. The debts. Lila's business, the baby, we need stability. The house, it's just sitting here, and you deserve better than rattling around alone." "Alone?" The word came out sharper than I'd intended, the first crack in my carefully maintained composure. "I've never been alone, Marcus. Not with you here. But you've been plotting my exile like I'm some burden to be disposed of. Forging papers? Knowing about the minerals for over a decade and keeping silent? That's not stability. That's theft." He flinched as if I'd slapped him, tears welling in eyes that still held traces of the boy who'd once promised we'd face the world together. "I was scared," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Dad's gone, you're getting older. I thought I was protecting us. Protecting our future." "Our future?" I leaned forward, my nurse's training keeping my voice steady even as my heart shattered. "Or just yours? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been planning my future without bothering to consult me about any of it." The confession that followed was like watching a dam burst. Years of deception poured out of him in a torrent of desperation and self-justification. The gambling had started after his first divorce, he claimed, just small bets at the track to feel something other than the crushing weight of failure. But small bets became larger ones, and larger ones became debts to people who didn't accept excuses or payment plans. It was supposed to be temporary, he said, his hands shaking as he ran them through his hair. Just until I could get back on my feet. But every time I thought I was close to breaking even, something would go wrong. The interest rates, the penalties, it just kept growing. Lila's boutique hadn't failed due to the pandemic, as they'd claimed. It had been systematically drained to pay Marcus's gambling debts, her business partner absconding with what remained before filing for bankruptcy and leaving her holding worthless paper and empty promises. The power of attorney was supposed to be a safety net, Marcus continued, his voice barely audible above the storm outside. "Just in case something happened to you. But when the debts got worse, when Lila got pregnant and we realized we were out of options, it seemed like the only way. The only way to what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. To steal everything I've worked for while convincing me it was for my own good? He couldn't meet my eyes. We told ourselves we were helping you. That you'd be happier in assisted living, safer, with people around to take care of you. We researched the best facilities, the ones with the highest ratings. Phase 1, convince V, it's temporary, I quoted from Lila's note, watching him crumble further as he realized how thoroughly I'd uncovered their deception. That was Lila's handwriting on the Sunset Meadows brochure. Did you really think I was so senile I wouldn't notice? Before he could answer, the front door opened with a gust of wind and rain. Lila's voice called out cheerfully, I'm back. The weather is absolutely awful out there. Her footsteps approached the living room, and I heard the exact moment she saw the evidence spread across the coffee table. Oh God, she breathed, her face going white as she took in the geological report and ultrasound images. Marcus, what's happening? She knows, Marcus said simply, his voice hollow with defeat. Everything. She knows everything. Lila's hand flew instinctively to her belly, a gesture that spoke volumes about her priorities. How much does she know? All of it, I answered for myself, my voice cutting through their panic with surgical precision. The minerals Marcus has known about for over a decade. The forged power of attorney. The assistant living plans. And yes, Lila, I know about the baby too. Her defensive posture crumbled into something approaching genuine emotion. We wanted to tell you, she whispered, tears starting to flow. After the sale. As a surprise. We thought. You thought you'd use my grandchild as a consolation prize? The words came out colder than I'd intended, but the sheer audacity of their reasoning had pushed me past the point of maternal gentleness. That learning I was going to be a grandmother would somehow make up for stealing my home and warehousing me in an institution? It wasn't supposed to be permanent, Lila said, her voice breaking. We researched the nicest places, the ones with the best care. We thought you might actually prefer it, no more worrying about maintenance, about being alone, about being in the way, I finished for her. About being an inconvenience to the family who was supposed to love me. The argument that followed was raw and devastating, years of buried resentments and hidden truths erupting like infected wounds finally lanced. Marcus confessed to everything, the decade-long knowledge of the mineral deposits, the strategic marriage to someone with real estate expertise, the careful cultivation of my trust while planning my betrayal. Lila revealed the depths of their financial desperation, the loans from predatory lenders, the threats that had driven them to view my assets as their only salvation. We love you, Marcus said finally, his voice cracked and broken. We never wanted to hurt you. We didn't see any other way. Love? I stood up, my carefully maintained composure finally giving way to the rage that had been building for weeks. You call this love? Lying to me for months, forging legal documents, planning to steal millions of dollars from me? If this is love, Marcus, then I've been doing it wrong for 72 years. By the time the worst of the storm had passed, both outside and in my living room, we'd reached the point of exhausted truth. Marcus slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon, all his careful plans in ruins around him. Lila sat curled in the corner of the sofa, one hand on her belly, the other clutching a tissue as she contemplated a future without the stolen millions they'd counted on. That night, after they'd retreated to their room in defeat and shame, I made one final phone call to Elias. Despite the late hour, he answered on the first ring, his voice alert and professional. It's done, I told him simply. They know I know everything. We had it out tonight. How did they take it? About as well as you'd expect. Lots of tears, lots of justifications, lots of claims that they were doing it for my own good. I paused, listening to the settling sounds of my house around me. But Elias, I think they're genuinely remorseful. Scared, certainly, but I saw something in Marcus tonight that reminded me of the boy I raised. What do you want to do, Vivian? We have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges. Fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, we could send them both to prison for years. I'd been dreading this moment, the choice between justice and mercy, between revenge and redemption. I want to give them a choice, I said finally. Redemption or ruin. Help me develop the mineral rights ethically, partner with legitimate mining companies to create jobs and benefit the community, and they can share in the proceeds. Or face the legal consequences of everything they've done. That's generous, Vivian. Maybe more generous than they deserve. Maybe. But Marcus is still my son, and that baby Lila's carrying is still my grandchild. I won't let greed destroy what's left of this family, even if they were willing to. The papers were signed the next morning in Elias's office, with Marcus and Lila sitting across from us like defendants awaiting sentencing. The power of attorney was officially revoked, the house and all assets transferred to an ironclad trust that protected them from any future manipulation. But alongside the legal protections came an offer of partnership, a chance for Marcus to use his geological knowledge legitimately, for Lila to apply her real estate skills to beneficial development projects. This is your one chance, I told them as we left the law office. You can be part of building something meaningful, something that benefits everyone, or you can face the consequences of what you've already done. But either way, you'll never again have the power to steal from me or manipulate me. That part of your plan is over forever. As we drove home through streets still wet from the previous night's storm, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not the naive hope of someone who trusts blindly, but the hard-earned hope of someone who's faced the worst and chosen to believe in the possibility of redemption. The game was over, but perhaps, if we were all very lucky, something better was about to begin. The choice Marcus made surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. 3 days after our devastating confrontation, after nights of hushed conversations behind their bedroom door and mornings filled with the kind of awkward silence that follows earth-shattering revelations, he knocked on my sewing room door with the tentative uncertainty of a child seeking forgiveness. "Mom? Could we talk?" I set down the quilt square I'd been working on, a pattern called Broken Star that seemed grimly appropriate for our circumstances, and gestured to the chair by the window. He sat heavily, looking older than his 45 years, the weight of his choices etched in the lines around his eyes. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice hoarse from what I suspected had been considerable soul-searching. "About what you said. About redemption versus ruin." He paused, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white. "I choose redemption, Mom. If you'll still have me. If you think there's any way to come back from what I've done." The tears that followed weren't the manipulative displays I'd witnessed during our confrontation, but the raw, ugly crying of genuine remorse. He told me about the therapy appointment he'd already scheduled, about the gambling counseling program Lila had researched, about the debt consolidation plan they'd drafted that would take years to complete but would do so honestly, without stealing from anyone else. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said, his voice breaking. "I know what I did was unforgivable. But this baby..." His hand moved unconsciously toward the direction of their bedroom, where Lila was presumably resting. "I don't want my child to grow up ashamed of who their father is. I want to be better. I want to build something instead of just taking." The family therapy sessions that followed were among the most difficult things I'd ever endured, and I'd spent 40 years dealing with medical emergencies and human crises. Dr. Sarachin, the counselor Elias had recommended, had a gift for exposing uncomfortable truths with surgical precision, forcing us to examine not just Marcus's betrayal but the family dynamics that had made it possible. The first few sessions were awkward affairs, filled with defensive postures and careful explanations that skirted the real issues. Marcus wanted to focus on his gambling addiction as if it were a disease that had infected him against his will. Lila tried to position herself as an innocent bystander swept along by circumstances beyond her control. I found myself wanting to play the role of the perfect victim, the martyred mother who'd done everything right only to be betrayed by an ungrateful child. But Dr. Chen wouldn't let any of us hide behind comfortable narratives. "Vivian," she said during our fourth session, "you've talked extensively about Marcus's deceptions, but I'm curious about your own. When did you start keeping secrets from your family?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't understand." "I never." "You've been intercepting their conversations, going through private documents, conducting geological surveys without their knowledge. You've spent weeks living a lie, pretending to be someone you're not. How is that different from what they were doing?" The parallel was uncomfortable but undeniable. In fighting their deception, I'd become deceptive myself. In protecting myself from their manipulation, I'd learned to manipulate. The realization was humbling and necessary. I was scared, I admitted finally, the words feeling strange in my mouth. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely powerless. I'd spent 40 years as a nurse, taking charge of emergencies, making life and death decisions. But this made me feel helpless. That admission opened something in me that had been locked away for decades. I found myself sharing things I'd never spoken aloud, the dreams I'd sacrificed when Theo died and I had to focus entirely on survival and raising Marcus. The novel I'd wanted to write, the travel I'd postponed indefinitely, the art classes I'd given up to pay for Marcus's college education. I told myself those sacrifices were what good mothers do, I said, my voice thick with tears I'd held back for years. But part of me resented them. Part of me wondered what my life would have looked like if I'd been more selfish, if I'd put my own dreams first sometimes. Marcus was crying too by then, finally understanding the full weight of what his betrayal had meant. Not just the theft of my security, but the invalidation of every sacrifice I'd made for him, every dream I'd deferred so he could have better opportunities. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I never thought about. I never realized how much you'd given up. I just saw you as this strong person who could handle anything, who didn't need the same things other people needed." "We all stumble, Marcus," I said, reaching across the space between us to take his hand for the first time since the confrontation. "But family? It's not about never falling down. It's about the getting up. It's about helping each other stand." The transformation that followed was gradual but profound. Instead of selling my house and exiling me to assisted living, we embarked on something unprecedented, a sustainable development project that would benefit our entire community while preserving everything I loved about my home. Working with Dr. Klein and a team of ethical mining engineers, we developed a plan to extract the rare earth minerals using environmentally responsible methods that would actually improve the property rather than destroying it. The old vegetable garden where Theo and I had grown tomatoes and corn became the site for a state-of-the-art processing facility that looked more like a modern art installation than an industrial operation. Marcus threw himself into the project with the passion he'd once reserved for gambling, his geological expertise finally channeled toward something constructive. His knowledge of the mineral deposits, gained through years of deception, became the foundation for legitimate partnerships with green technology companies desperate for sustainable sources of rare earth materials. Lila's real estate background proved invaluable in navigating the complex regulatory requirements and community outreach efforts. Her failed boutique was reborn as an online eco-store specializing in products made from responsibly sourced materials, including some derived from our own mineral extraction operations. But the most meaningful aspect of the project was what we chose to do with the profits. Instead of the beach house Marcus and Lila had fantasized about, we established the Theodore Hargrove Foundation, named for the man whose hobby geology had accidentally led to this windfall. The foundation funded scholarships for single mothers pursuing nursing degrees, supported community gardens and food deserts throughout the county, and endowed a new wing at General Hospital dedicated to emergency cardiac care. Watching Marcus present the first scholarship check to a young woman who reminded me of myself at 25, determined, scared, but absolutely committed to building a better life for her children, I finally understood what redemption looked like. Not the erasure of past mistakes, but their transformation into something meaningful and lasting. The mineral extraction brought unexpected benefits to the entire Elmwood Lane neighborhood. Property values rose not because of gentrification, but because of genuine improvements to infrastructure and community resources. The jobs created by the processing facility provided good employment for local residents, and the foundation's community garden project transformed vacant lots into spaces of beauty and sustenance. 1 year after that rain-lashed confrontation that had nearly destroyed our family, I sat on my wraparound porch holding my grandson for the first time. Little Theo, named for his great-grandfather, was perfect in the way all babies are, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine with the unshakable trust that only the very young possess. "You know what, kiddo?" I whispered to him as the afternoon sun filtered through the maple leaves that had witnessed so much family history. "Your great-grandfather would have loved to meet you. He would have told you stories about rocks and minerals and all the treasures hidden beneath the earth. But the real treasure isn't what's buried down there, it's what grows up here, in the light." Marcus sat beside me, watching his son with the wonder of a man who'd almost lost everything and found it again transformed. Lila was inside, preparing bottles and organizing the nursery we'd set up in the room that had once been my sewing space. The sounds of their domestic happiness filled the house with warmth I'd thought was lost forever. "You and me against the world, kiddo," I continued, using the words Marcus and I had once shared. "But this time, we'll build it together. All of us. Your parents learned some hard lessons about what family really means, but they learned them. And you? You get to grow up in a world they're helping to create, a better world, built on truth instead of lies, on partnership instead of theft." The house around us hummed with life in ways it never had when it was just me rattling around in rooms too big for one person. But it wasn't the life Marcus had originally planned, the assisted living exile that would have left these walls empty and my legacy scattered to the wind. This was something richer, more complex, rooted in the kind of love that survives even the deepest betrayals. Dr. Chen had been right when she'd told us that healthy families aren't defined by the absence of conflict, but by their ability to work through it honestly. We'd been forced to examine every assumption we'd made about each other, to confront uncomfortable truths about duty and sacrifice and the price of unconditional love. The foundation continued to grow, attracting donations and volunteers from across the region. Marcus's expertise in sustainable mining practices led to consulting opportunities that took him around the country, helping other communities develop their natural resources responsibly. Lila's online business expanded into a platform for ethical consumerism that connected environmentally conscious buyers with responsible producers. But perhaps the most important change was in how we talked to each other. No more hidden agendas or unspoken resentments. No more sacrifices made in silent martyrdom or gratitude assumed without expression. We'd learned to be honest about our needs, our fears, our dreams, even when that honesty was uncomfortable. As I watched the sunset behind the same maple trees where Theo had proposed all those decades ago, where Marcus had learned to climb as a boy, where my grandson would someday make his own discoveries about courage and love and the complicated beauty of family life, I understood that betrayal hadn't broken me after all. It had cracked me open, yes, but from that fracture had grown something unbreakable, not the brittle strength of someone who trusts blindly, but the flexible resilience of someone who chooses to keep loving even after learning the worst about the people she loves most. The house on Elmwood Lane stood prouder than ever, its wraparound porch glowing against the gathering dusk. But it was no longer just a monument to survival or a testament to the past. It had become something more precious, a foundation for the future, a place where second chances bloomed as reliably as the rosebushes Theo and I had planted with such hope all those years ago. Some stories end with justice served or revenge completed. But the best stories, I've learned, end with grace, the kind of grace that transforms theft into generosity, betrayal into wisdom, and broken trust into something stronger than it was before. That's the legacy I'm building now, not just for little Theo but for every family struggling with the complicated mathematics of love and loyalty, sacrifice and selfhood. The Decaf coffee that started this whole journey sits forgotten in my pantry now, replaced by truth that's stronger than any stimulant. And in the quiet moments when I rock my grandson to sleep and listen to his parents planning their honest future downstairs, I know that some switches, the ones that matter most, are permanent. What would you have done in my place? When family betrayal cuts deepest, when the people you trust most prove capable of devastating deception, how do you choose between justice and mercy? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that someone close to you is planning something that would fundamentally change your life without your knowledge? How did you handle it? Did you choose confrontation or quiet investigation? Redemption or consequences? Your experiences could help others facing similar heartbreak. Family dynamics are complicated, and money has a way of revealing people's true characters in ways that can be both shocking and illuminating. Maybe you've been the betrayer rather than the betrayed, or perhaps you've watched these dramas unfold in your own extended family. Whatever your perspective, I believe there's wisdom in sharing our stories. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to Voices of Rosa for more real-life tales of family drama, second chances, and the complicated ways we love each other. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. And remember, whether you're the grandmother fighting for your legacy, the adult child making destructive choices, or someone caught in between, it's never too late to choose a different path. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply tell the truth and see what grows from that fertile ground. Until next time, may your coffee be strong, your family honest, and your legacy built on love rather than deception. With heartfelt appreciation, Rosa.